Hey guys, I'm just making an updated basing guide as I realized that most people who would like to try basing don't actually yet have Octo. So in this setup, we are replacing the Octo body and legs for actual DPS gear. I just wanted to make it as affordable as possible for those who don't have a large cash stack, and if that's the case for you, you probably want to stick with Virtus. If your cash stack is really hurting, but you still would like to base, you can do it in Ganodermic. Because as long as you augment and perk your gear correctly, you'll be able to base without using much food. So to start out, we have our gear requirements. If you're watching this video, I assume you already have access to overloads, curses, and invention. Depending on your cash stack, you will need Gano, Virtus, or Tectonic. You can also use Octo if you have it, but Octo is never needed. And lastly, you also need a Merciless Kite Shield, which is the tier 90 Mage Shield. I'm using an Amulet of Souls as it provides a little extra bonus to Protection Prayers and an Asylum Surgeon's Ring from the Broken Home quest, because it has a chance to save Adrenaline when using Thresholds, and it's also non-gradable. There are also a lot of other items that can help you to save food when basing, such as a Leviathan Ring or a Defender's Insignia, but this guide is just to show you that you don't actually need them. So as for perks, it's pretty much required to have at least Enhanced Devoted 3 and Impatient 3. And then Turtling is also a must to have on your tier 90 shield, as it extends the barricade timer by 4 or 6 seconds, depending if you have Turtling 3 or not. As long as you have those two, you should be fine, but if you wanted a little extra security, I would opt for Lucky 5 and Crystal Shield. Otherwise, if you think you're good, just go ahead and get Biting 3 and Crackling. And then most of you should already have this if you're just using your PVM gear, but yeah. Alright, let's get into the video. So before we start the fight, there's a couple things I want to talk about and mention. The first thing is the full manual versus Revolution. Most people tend to use Revolution because they have trouble building Adrenaline, while thinking about, what defensive to use next or what special is Yaka about to use. But the problem with Revolution is that there's always going to be so many times when you try to res, you drop your prayer, but you miss the tick for res because you're already casting your next ability. And so Yaka will punish you for that in hitting 6 or 8 Ks. The benefit for Yaka versus BM, however, is that Yaka is a little bit more forgiving in terms of smiting. If you get hit at BM without your prayer, you're probably going to get hit by 10k plus hits, possibly, whereas Yaka won't hit that high, which gives you a small window of opportunity, to put that prayer back on, eat, or use defensives. I've learned how to use full manual when I was basing Virago, but I would definitely recommend using full manual just a little bit, get in the habit of using those hotkeys. I really like my hotkeys as it's just like a standard QWERTY setup with my extra defensive hotkeys numbered 1 through 9. And I'd also like to point out that my main prayer, or your main prayer, should be a hotkey that's extremely easy for you to use. For example, my hotkey for my prayer is 2, and then Soul Split is Shift 2. So this is just very useful when, trying to drop your prayer to get those massive reses, and just alternate between that. Alright, let's get into the fight here. So as I fight this boss, there's a couple things that you should notice. The first is that as a base, I always bring Vuln. You can use Vuln at the same time when you're using other defensive abilities. So, why should the base not bring Vuln? Second, in cases of emergency, you can see that I also have nature runes to bind jellies that stray too close. Typically, you won't need to use it until Mirage, but you never know. And then lastly, the major reason people can't base Yaka well is just because of the nerves. You have to stop panicking and just calm down. Because, once you're calm, you can see the fight in slow motion, and know exactly, what you have to do. And a lot of time, it means being adaptable. Just because you're basing doesn't mean you can't help with other areas. Such as, someone forgot to CPR, so just go CPR them. The Shark Tank died, start taking both pools. There's a lot that can happen that will cause kills to fail. But with that being said, there's also a lot that you can do to prevent a kill from being failed, by stepping up and doing just what needs to be done. So there's two big parts of basing. The first is your rotation, being able to cycle through your defensives efficiently and effectively, which will in turn conserve your food. And then second is just knowing Yaka's special attacks and knowing what's about to happen next. So as for rotation, res is your biggest ally. Res is what will help you conserve the most food. To get a good res, just make sure to drop your prayer and then turn it back on after Yaka hits you. I typically like to follow with Devo after that, which is the second biggest ability, as it is a threshold and it also negates 100% damage for the 10 seconds. And if res and Devo are both on cooldown, my next ability on my rotation is a combination of Freedom and Reflect. And you should think of Freedom as a Reflect, in a sense, because in this fight it removes half of the stacks that Yaka applies to you. What that means is that since you're always most likely going to be at max stacks, which is 15, it means that Yaka is doing 4 times damage to you. So each stack increases Yaka's damage to you by 0.2 times. So if you're using Freedom at max stacks, it will remove 8 stacks. So now you're just taking about 2 times damage, which is about half. So then after your Reflect runs out, then you can Debilitate. And then you have your 2 ultimate abilities. You have Barricade and Immortality. And I just use those depending on Yaka's impending special attack. One thing to note is that you never want to use a defensive unless it's Freedom or Debilitate before Yaka does its Sand special, just because the Sand will negate all active defensives except for Debilitate. So if all your defenses are on cooldown, your best bet is probably just use Preparation and sip a couple of brews until defensive is ready again. And as long as you follow the rule of thumb, which is to not overlap your defensives, you should be fine. I mean, there's no reason to use Devo if you still have 8 seconds left on Cade, for example. Finally, Yaka's special attacks. So Tendril, Shark, and Sandpool all follow the same rotation pretty much. Stun doesn't have a special, so it's a little different. But for Tendril and Shark, the rotation is 4 attacks, a jelly, another 4 attacks, and then blue, and then 4 attacks, and then the special, and then it repeats. For example, on Tendril Pool, if you see that the blue just came out, that means you should be expecting the Tendril in 4 attacks. So just make sure that you have either Cade, Immort, or just escape from it, and make sure that you're ready. And then same thing for the Shark Pool. However, you can just run away from the sharks without any problems. You don't need to waste Cade or anything like that. And you can, of course. But yeah, so Sandpool's rotation is just slightly changed, where it's 4 attacks, blue, 4 attacks, jelly, and then 4 attacks, and then the special, which is the sand. So this means that when you see that jelly spawn, then I like to use 1 defensive, typically Devo if I have it, and that will last me all the way until the sand happens. Just make sure not to use another defensive right before the sand, because it will take it down in the sand, so make sure you don't use Cade or anything. And then for Stun Pool, since there is no special except for the stun mechanic, the rotation is just 6 attacks, the jelly, and then 7 attacks, and then blue, and then it repeats. You won't actually know where Yaka will start when he first jumps to a pool, in terms of where he's at in the rotation. So you always got to be prepared for, that Tendril straight away, or a sand that happens, immediately. So as long as if you see a blue or a jelly, then you know where Yaka is at in the rotation, and then you can start planning accordingly. But until that first special or blue jelly happens, then you won't know where he's at. So just be prepared for anything. And then if you didn't know already, the first pool that Yaka jumps to is random, but then following that, it's always going to follow that clockwise rotation, with going to the middle pool in between each time. So once you know all of Yaka's special attacks and rotations, you're able to use full manual effectively, and you can use your defensives properly, you will be able to base without using much food. So from there, you can start perfecting your rotations more, and so you can start using Sunshines, bring a Titan, start adding to the DPS. But while you're learning how to base, your primary focus should be, first and foremost, is staying alive and conserving your food. Just shield camp the whole time, learn how to not use much food. Don't worry about the Sunshines, don't worry about Wild Magics is fixed, what have it. Just perfect your defensive rotation, and you'll become a great base. Alright, and thanks for watching the video, and I really hope this helped some of you, and I just hope to see a lot more good bases out there. Have a good one, guys.